Hello everyone, welcome to Red's channel. The topic of today's video is the Ducati Panigale V2. This time I start with the weight and the observation that the new Ducati Panigale V2 is the lightest Panigale ever. We're talking about 176 kilos in running order, but without fuel in the tank, 17 kilos less than the model currently on the market. It is evident how this result is not only due to the new engine. The V2, with variable timing, is presented here in a configuration of 120 horsepower and 93 Nm of torque, but it is a project that, unlike others that preceded it, is primarily designed to be lightweight. The reason, simply, the old Panigale V2, even with the necessary optimizations, is a project that starts from the 1299. Then it reduces the displacement, carrying with it dimensions and therefore weights from a higher displacement. The same can be said of another twin-cylinder, Ducati the head, narrow 937. In turn, a reduction of the engine, narrow head 1200. The new V2, on the other hand, is born medium, weighing only kg. And for this reason, all the bikes that are equipped with it and will be equipped with it can benefit from an overall weight reduction if for its characteristics the Panigale V2 currently on the market. It was a bike that danced alone because it was not actually comparable with the competition. The new bike forcefully enters the revived super sport segment, where others have already positioned themselves or will position themselves. Honda CBR 600RR, Kawasaki Ninja ZX IR 636, Yamaha Ramon Chef Moto 675 SRR, and KTM 990 RCR. If we carefully read the data, it is clear that this time Ducati did not focus on pure power, but rather on the overall efficiency of the vehicle. A philosophical change, if you will, but one that leads to the same result, being the fastest of all. Among the bikes I just listed, the new Ducati Panigale V2 with its horsepower and the best power-to-weight ratio. And as you often hear me say, while power and torque are obviously beneficial for acceleration and top speed, low weight helps. In all riding situations, acceleration, braking, changes of direction, and cornering. The approach chosen for the chassis also explains well why the new bike is so light. On the Panigale V2, the engine acts as a stressed member, a classic feature of Ducati. The swing arm and foot pegs are directly attached to the twin-cylinder engine, while the steering head is connected to the V2 via the so-called front frame in aluminum, just like on the V4. And if you're looking for similarities with the old Panigale, you'll understand that even the chassis speaks a completely different language. The wheelbase is longer, the steering head angle and trail are tighter, and the weight distribution is different. Is something missing? Yes, the progressive linkage is missing. Here, the shock absorber is directly anchored to the swing arm. The good news for all sport motorcyclists is that it finally appears. The hated 180 bar, 60 at the rear, is replaced by a classic 190/55. And this will allow changing the model and brand of tire whenever desired, which was previously impossible. The calipers are Brembo M50 with 320mm discs, common to both available versions, namely Panigale V2 and Panigale V2S, which we see here, being tested and are mainly differentiated by the suspension setup. The Panigale V2 in fact uses a Kayaba-Marzocchi combination for the shock absorber and fork. And the Panigale V2S that you see here and that we will test today, it relies instead on Öhlins for both components and also for the steering damper. Additionally, it is equipped with a lithium-ion battery. The V2 is also very well equipped in terms of electronics, featuring a 6-axis inertial platform and consequently the entire suite of controls: traction, wheelie control, engine brake adjustment, and sporty cornering. ABS with slide-by-brake functionality for. The riding modes available are race, sport, road, and wet, all customizable. The new TFT dashboard also features a 16.9 format and a 5-inch diagonal, capable of offering 3 possible views: road, road pro, and track. And it can also be connected to offer turn-by-turn navigation. And now we climb into the saddle. Here we are, on the saddle of the Panigale V2 2025. Let's see what lies ahead when you get on board the new Ducati Supersport. Next generation Supersport, let's remember, because Supersports are changing a bit, but first of all, the control panel, new instrumentation, 5.5-inch display, very readable, I must say, with all the indicators. But a side note, very wide steering plate with very wide handlebars. And above all, It is one of the first Ducati Supersport bikes, apart from the Supersport 950, which was almost a normal sport touring, to have the clip-on handlebars above the steering plate and not below the steering plate. However, if you are particularly into racing, you can change the steering plate, change the clip-on handlebars with a racing kit they provide. So collars fastened there, below the steering plate, and have a more sporty riding position. This is what is on the bikes of Marquez and Bagnaia, but that being said, let's go see what can be seen. As you can see, this is the racing screen. So we have three types of dashboards, three types of dashboard displays. This is the racing one, by holding down the left button for a long time. By the way, the entire control panel here, the whole left block, is completely new. This cruise with the enter button in the middle is very comfortable to use, I must say, and we have changed the screen to the road screen. And then we have the Road Pro, which gives me all the controls currently engaged, and also the level of torque and power head delivered. This changes by holding down the right button for a long time. The mappings, let's go back to our racing mapping, which is the one that interests us the most, as you can always see. Also here on the right, it's all the same. A bit like the Panigale V4. So the layout has a strong family resemblance to the Panigale V4. As you can see on the right, there are all the controls. By quickly pressing to the right, we activate the control that interests us. Modify. When we press enter, we enter and it can modify. All of this can be done, of course, simply while riding, so we can change the controls on the fly. In this case, here is the stopwatch that gives you lap times. We also have the GPS, which is an optional feature on this bike, so it gives you lap times completely automatically. On the left block, there is also the cruise control on the right block. In addition to the kill switch, there's also the button for the heated grips, which are always quite handy. But it is still a sign that shows this Ducati pays attention even to those who want to travel on the road. To change the mappings, and simply press the mode button here on the left block. As you can see, we enter the mapping menu. Obviously, we are stationary now. There are also various setup menus, but when you are traveling, only the mapping changes. So it will become sport, road, or wet, or race. By holding down the system, you see that it shows you that the mapping is loading, and at this moment, it is loaded. Entering the various submenus. So in the resetup, for example, we can, here it is, sport setup. We can obviously go and customize all the menus, which means that there is no menu. But each menu can actually be customized on this screen. As you can see, does it tell you at this moment the controls as they are set? Then, obviously, by navigating within the menu, you can modify the various screens, connect Bluetooth devices, because you can do that here. This instrumentation also allows for turn-by-turn navigation, and so on, more or less. This is everything you see in terms of finish. In my opinion, it's very good. At least what you can see at a glance, it's not bad at all. A Brembo radial clutch with a radial pump I press. In short, there's a nice setup. The screens are clear, I must say. In fact, I would add, for those who are very sensitive to the topic, there's also a fuel level indicator. I must say that everything that needs to be seen is visible. So the lap time, especially the gear engaged, the controls on the right, it's all very clearly visible. So from this point of view, I must say that Ducati has done a good job. And now maybe we'll go for a little spin on the track.
on a really beautiful track, guys. If you happen to come to Seville and ride on this track, I recommend it. It's a bit tricky, as the English say, so you need to learn it with many blind crests and situations. A bit critical, but when you use a bike like the Panigale V2, they become a bit less critical. Here with 1,000, it would really be quite a struggle. I get on the bike, and I have to say it is, in my opinion, it confirms what I expected to find, because I understood the work Ducati has done on the Panigale, starting from the new V2, which is a very light engine, so a focused effort, all about the pursuit of lightness and the best power to weight ratio and driving effectiveness in all situations. First of all, I start with the ergonomics, which are beautiful ergonomics. In fact, I am very curious to use it on the road, because these handlebars above the steering plate, nicely open, give almost a naked bike feel. Let's put it that way. And I believe that this bike on the road can truly be a super sport bike that is very rewarding to use. You know, I'm not an absolute fan of super sport bikes used on the road, but I have to say that in this case, I expect a bike that works very well. Also because in the first sessions, while learning the track, I also forced myself a bit in the first laps to ride in a somewhat road-like manner without leaning too much to understand how the bike reacted, and its handling is truly its strong point. I like the ergonomics for the triangulation, for the handlebars that I already mentioned to you, and also for the position of the foot pegs, which never touch the ground clearance. This bike has a lot of it, but if it didn't have so much ground clearance, it probably wouldn't even be a Ducati. And especially in the part here where there's the exhaust curve, where in a way I expected to touch with the boot, and I wear a size 44. In short, a good chunk, let's say. In reality, it didn't bother me at all, so everything's fine. One thing to point out, however, is this seat to tail distance, which I found to be a bit short. Let me explain better. I like bikes with short seats when going on the track, because I tend to always move a bit backward, so I tend to load the rear a lot and lighten the front, so I always look for a buffer that pushes me a bit forward. If you remember on the Panigale V4, that's exactly what I said. I would have liked a buffer that kept me a bit more forward. Here in this case, we might be a bit too much on the other side, so the bike is short. And when I'm in a curve, leaning, I feel quite comfortable. I move very well on the seat. The entire part of the seat here is well shaped. You can shift around well, no problem at all. When you need to tuck in on the straight, you quickly end up touching the little buffer. And moreover, this little buffer doesn't help you to go a bit further back with your rear. So this is something I will point out. Let's move on to the engine, which I must say has indeed confirmed what I expected, even after watching Federico's test with the Multistrada V2. I am glad that Ducati has finally thought of an engine, perhaps starting more from an engine suitable for the road rather than a racing engine. Let me explain better. There's a lot of pull below, a lot of torque. It gets you out of the curves in a really very effective way. An engine that has low and mid-range power, that can now compete with the best twin cylinders, even inline, perhaps even Austrian ones in the category. As for the pull below, then at the top it has a good stretch, but it is obviously not comparable to that of the old V2. But in my opinion, it's much better this way, because with the V2 you had to wait a bit too long, you had to rev it a bit too much. When you were on the road, the bike was not at all pleasant and effective to use on the track. It stretched out a lot. Exactly, I repeat, you always had to wait for the engine to reach the right range. But that was a result of the Super Quattro design. Here, as soon as you touch the gas, the bike shoots forward, so every acceleration is out of the curves, giving you a beautiful progression. At the top, it reaches up to 11,350 RPM, and let's say it has a beautiful torque curve, very evenly distributed across the entire power band. But above all, it's what comes underneath that really helps you, all aided by a nice gear ratio, though on this track, I might have preferred one less tooth on the sprocket, because there were points where you would hit the limiter just before braking to enter the curve, so it wasn't worth holding the gear. And from a gearbox that I must say, guys, works really well, it's a typical Ducati gearbox with a small peculiarity that sometimes it's a bit sensitive, and so it might disengage the quick shifter when you're not exactly precise during the shift. But the gearbox is a typical Ducati gearbox, so when you reach the end of the straight with really significant braking, you can downshift very quickly. You can switch to racing mode very easily. So the engine, I must say, I liked in all its aspects. I point out, but here we are on the track, guys. It's not very important. Let's say, well, when we go on the track, it will be something to check a bit when we go maybe on the road. If there are any vibrations, a bit at high revs, I'm talking about high revs, I mean above 8,000, 9,000, so when the engine is really spinning a lot, not below, but at high revs, they come a little. However, on the road, let's say that these are probably revs that you don't reach. It's a bit of a shame that we didn't get to try this bike on the road, because in my opinion, it would have really shown its full potential. Let's get to the point about the chassis as well, 17 kilo or less. That's not really a small amount, it's a lot. And I, riding this bike, I found many characteristics of a super sport, like when I raced in Super Sport 300. Braking, you can brake in an incredible way. That phase of braking and entering the curve is a dream on this bike. Really something that didn't happen with the old Panigale, because first it had the suspension that, as you know, I didn't like much, and so it always remained a bit high. And second, the bike was much more rigid to use. In this case, the changes of direction, the curve entry, all that phase of braking, entry, curves and travel, where in the end, these are the phases where you make the lap time. This bike is incredibly effective, to the point that in braking you can go so deep that I often found myself a bit short, and I kept trying to brake a little further, and you realize that it's an incredible margin. A bike that remains super stable during braking, truly super effective in this phase. And then, when you are in the travel phase, it manages to close the curves with a very significant ease. I prefer to use the engine brake in position 1, which is the stronger engine brake, let's say the one with more hold, because there's quite a jump from 1 to 2, and the bike tends, at least on this track, to run a bit too much, in my opinion. You know that I like the bike with little engine braking, but here the 2 is really quite free. So I found the U1 perfectly calibrated. There's no off, but it's true that on the track, when you go to open the throttle, you give it all, because there's really a lot of grip here. Also, because today we used slicks, SC1 in short, tires that honestly this bike barely tickles, because they are used to running even on super bikes. So we didn't have any issues with controls, wheelies or traction control. In short, these tires really do an excellent job. Precisely, the front end. Perhaps the part I like the most, because you can really, just like with the Panigale V4, like the new Panigale V4, arrive with the brake in hand, release the brake, enter the corner, and really feel the tire biting the asphalt. This aspect makes it easy for you to go fast, especially in my opinion, if you are less experienced, because it's the more experienced rider who can handle certain difficult situations. But for someone less experienced, when they have a bike that gives them feedback like this, they can push themselves a bit further. Braking is of the highest level, with a lever that doesn't extend a millimeter throughout the entire day, even when braking really hard. And this is a bike that obviously helps you go fast all day long, because it is really not tiring and very effective. So to conclude, let's say that the strong point is definitely the braking phase, entry, curves and trajectory. Where does this bike stand? I believe that in its category we will test the others when they arrive. It still has a very few rivals. I would like to add something perhaps a bit provocative. It's true, the prices, motorcycles are expensive, Ducatis are expensive. Let's say one of the main comments has been, but it only has 120 horsepower. It's too expensive for having 120 horsepower. Let's say that motorcycles are not ham or meat. You don't buy them by the kilo, by the gram, or by the horsepower. Motorcycles are bought because we like them, first of all, and if I had to give a valuation, euros per horsepower, maybe one could say it's expensive. However, if I have to make a valuation in terms of euros per fun factor, then this bike is not that expensive. High handlebars. I tell you that, as I mentioned in the presentation, there is a different plate with more racing style handlebars. If you use it a lot on the track, you might like it. But throughout the day, I didn't feel the need to have lower handlebars. Keep in mind that when riding real racing bikes like Superbike and MotoGP, the handlebars are even wider and higher than these, because they need to have control during braking and get less tired. Because if you have very low handlebars, when you brake, you end up putting additional strain on your arms. Small adjustments I made during the day, but really small ones I tightened. The fork compression by 2 clicks, because it was starting to go down. when you start to pick up the pace, in my opinion, it was going down a bit too quickly. So I asked for a little more control and also a bit of rebound on the shock absorber, because in some situations, the bike tended to kick a little when you went to attack the brakes. I found a balance that I think is valid. And above all, I must obviously say that partly due to the lightness of the bike and partly because there is obviously 90 Nm of torque, but it's not the 120 Nm of torque of a 1000 cc. And when you take the throttle in hand, at the mid-corner, this bike always stays flat. It doesn't squat, it doesn't half squat. And so it holds the line even with the throttle open, just like a true supersport should. Because with supersports, obviously the more you can keep the throttle open, the more effective you can be, even in the middle of the S-bends. The track here is complex because there are ascents and descents. You stay a lot on the front end in the S-bends like at Mugello, and in the descents like at Portimao. In short, the track has created a really interesting mix of curves. And I must say that the bike turns out to be very complete from this point of view. The cycling attitude is that of a true supersport. Also very light, so handling, braking, etc. With a pull at low revs and a thrust that is a bit more like a maxi than a true supersport. It will be really interesting this year to see if we will be able to achieve a comparison with its direct competitors. At least there are at least 3 at the moment that can be in this category. Keep in mind the newly born supersport category. The reason why Ducati also made this bike is precisely because obviously with the old Panigale V2 it had to be detuned, running at 70% throttle to race to be comparable to the others. They wanted to make a bike that was at the center of the newly born supersport segment, where there are now a lot of bikes with 120 horsepower. We're talking about indeed CBR6, IR, R9. And when it arrives, if the KTM arrives, which however has 130 horsepower, but we are in that range, there they wanted to make a bike that is a true ship. A school for those who want to start on the track, comfortable also for road use. And we will return to this topic because I want to verify it. However, it's not a bike with which you start going on the track and then it becomes too small or insufficient for you. In my opinion, it's a bike that when you start going fast, when you start finding your rhythm, when you become a bit more experienced, it will still be able to support you, because in the end, the name Panigale here, in my opinion, is neither diminished nor contradicted. But I would say that this is more or less everything I have noted down here in my notebook from the Seville circuit about the new Panigale V2 2025. There will definitely be a lot to discuss below, and I look forward to it because, in my opinion, this bike sparks discussion. But it's good that it does, because it's a bike you will see. It might also surprise you, but I repeat, motorcycles are not bought by horsepower. They are bought by the fun factor. If you have the chance, go and try it out. I'm looking forward to testing it on the road because, in my opinion, it will be a real surprise based on how I've seen it perform here, how the engine pulls from below. I think it will be a lot of fun, and hopefully we can do a comparison. We'll see you next time. Video, follow us, subscribe to the channel, follow us on social media, because as you have seen, we are creating a lot of content. We'll see you in the next video. Bye.